Hi everyone and welcome to English Digest. I'm Pat.
And I'm Kat.
So today's article is all about how global governments are responding to protests, demonstrations, and kind of anti-government action. And there has been quite a lot of this. Last year, there were lots, kind of the Hong Kong was the big one, I suppose, but it was by no means the only one.
Oh, yeah. There's protests in Chile, Kashmir, Sudan.
Iraq.
I
think in a few other places in North Africa, maybe. Barcelona, I think, had some. Yeah.
For the Catalonian population there was trying to,
they had to cancel the biggest football game in Spain. And just because they couldn't hold it in Barcelona.
Right.
Because that football game is kind of seen as Spain versus Catalonia as well.
Exactly, yeah.
So, yeah. So, yes, protests going on everywhere, and governments will obviously some will try slightly more peaceful ways, some will use quite violent means to stop this, and as we're going to read today, some are using technological ways to fight it.
Right.
Have you ever taken part in a protest or a demonstration?
I have. It wasn't a violent one or a huge one, but yes, I've done protests and demonstrations in my home state when we were doing a rally to add language about sexual minorities into the human rights or like non-discrimination clauses in our state.
Sounds good.
Which has not happened yet.
Oh, well. I marched against tuition fees for university students back in the 90s when they were starting to be introduced. But no, we still have them. I paid them, so
I did
happened
too.
So much for that. That's just our stuff. Let's look at what's happening around the world in our News Digest article.
Riots broke out in East Java, Indonesia in August 2019, stemming from the mistreatment of Papuan students. Indonesian police were reported to have called them racial slurs, including monkey. In response to the protests that erupted soon afterward, the Indonesian government blocked internet access and telephone data so protesters couldn't see or spread information online. Internet shutdowns like this have been on the rise. Governments around the world have been using them as a tool not only to prevent large crowds from forming, but also to stem the spread of information they see as a threat to their authority. Limiting the internet also allows governments to control stories about abuses of power and human rights violations. Shutdowns come with enormous consequences. Without internet access, citizens can't inform the international community of any abuses taking place. It's then difficult for other countries to justify taking action against offending governments. Shutdowns also make it harder for countries to encourage economic investment. If potential investors are worried they won't have internet access, they'll go elsewhere. Shutdowns can also cause disorder in people's daily lives. Hospitals, banks, and other important services require internet access to run properly. To get around shutdowns, protesters have turned to Bluetooth apps, which don't require internet access. These mesh networks let people spread information to those in their surrounding areas. However, they're also less secure than encrypted online apps, potentially putting movement participants in danger. Nonetheless, with few other choices, people are turning to them as they organize. Despite their negative impacts, it's unlikely that shutdowns will disappear anytime soon. However, people everywhere are learning from their fellow citizens and will continue to find ways to challenge their governments.
Okay, so let's start out by taking a look at our title, Global Governments Turning to Internet Shutdowns. One thing I'll point out here, we see the phrase or phrasal verb turning to a number of times in our article.
Yes.
If you turn to something, you kind of choose that as an option, but it's implied that it's not necessarily your first choice. It's kind of like, we're using this because I have to and it'll work, but ideally we wouldn't have to turn to this.
Right,
Something
exactly.
like that. I mean, it's sometimes okay. You can say, I turned to my parents for help, but you'd probably only do that if you couldn't solve the problem yourself.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
ideally, you wouldn't have to go and ask your parents for help. You'd fix your own problem. So here, governments are turning to internet shutdowns because they're saying, well, this seems to be the only way we can control what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. And when they turn to these shutdowns, well, a shutdown is just like it sounds. It's when you shut the internet down. Just as you would shut your computer down at the end of the day when you turn it off. Basically, they're cutting off people's access to the internet so that they can't use it at all.
Yeah, and telephone data as well. Shut down here is being used as a noun. Shut down as a phrasal verb is the action. I'm shutting down my computer.
Right.
That would be 2 words. So the article begins by talking about the piece of news that kind of started this whole idea or kind of brought this whole idea to light. And it's riots broke out in East Java, Indonesia in August 2019, stemming from the mistreatment of Papuan students. Now, I believe Papua means Papua New Guinea. Right, yeah, they're from Papua New Guinea. That's close to Indonesia. It's a sort of island, half island, is it? Just
It's
over
half
there?
of an island. Yeah, the other half is owned by Indonesia.
Right. So is that Java? Is that actually the island of Java?
Papua is the
island. Okay, so, all right. So it's students from Papua New Guinea in East Java, and they being mistreated, and this led to riots. Riots when large crowds get violent and disorderly. Maybe they started off in a kind of like just a peaceful protest, but due to one thing or another, police action, whatever, things get violent, things get out of control, they start fighting the police, they start fighting other groups, they start damaging property, shops, stealing things.
Setting fires, things like that.
Exactly. I think of the London riots, which were, I think, 2013 or 2012. I've kind of forgotten. But, big one in London after somebody was shot by a policeman. And that led to London basically being terrorized for 2 or 3 nights. As people, set fire to things, broke into shops, that kind of thing. Sadly, riots in England are often associated with football fans when they get out of control and start kind of fighting foreign fans and fighting foreign police. So that's another kind of riot, and that kind of doesn't start out peaceful. It's usually alcohol-fueled and very, very bad.
Oh, that stinks.
So that's the word riot. But what was this riot about?
Well, I guess it was from the mistreatment of Papuan students. It stemmed from that, which means that this was the incident that kind of made people want to start protesting, which might have evolved from the riot. So stem, of course, is like the sort of the root and the stalk of like a plant or a flower. So it's sort of the place where everything else grows out of. So stemming from, you could say that things grow out of that incident or that event.
Exactly. We will look at the word stem again later, and it does have a different meaning in another context. So this is stem from. When you use the preposition from, we're talking about what started something, where it came from, what began it, and so on. So this is what happened. Indonesian police were reported to have called them racial slurs, including monkey. So a slur is an insulting term. In this case, it's one that's applied to a group, usually something involving race, ethnicity, could be religion, something like that. It's kind of a bad word that's used to describe a whole group or culture of people.
Yeah.
A slur can also mean a kind of an accusation of something that damages someone's reputation.
Right.
You could say, hey, you stole money. How dare you? You've slurred my reputation. So it can be a verb. But in this case...
it could also be when you, for example, you're not speaking clearly and you say like this.
Yes, you'd
that's
be
slurring
your
speech.
words. Yeah, so there are a couple of meanings. In this one, it means it's a kind of a word that's been used to insult and say bad things about a whole group of people. So basically, they're calling Papuan students monkeys, which is awful.
That's really, really bad. And it implies that, they're dumb, maybe they're ugly.
Yeah, they're less than human. They're animals.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not okay. And it's especially not okay from police who are supposed to be protecting, citizens and making sure that they're safe from these kinds of things.
Even if they're from other countries.
Yeah, doesn't matter where you're from. The police, it's their job to protect people. So in response to the protests that erupted soon afterward, So I guess this caused some protests to come out, of course. The Indonesian government blocked internet access and telephone data, so protesters couldn't see or spread information online. So these protests erupted, and this is a really colorful sort of verb that's sort of a fancier way of saying blew up. So you could think of volcanoes often erupt when they spew lava and, liquid rock
everywhere.
Yep, exactly. So erupting is kind of like exploding when something suddenly happens in a very violent way.
Yeah, with lots of kind of force and heat and energy and, as Kat said, violence. So people protested, maybe the police got involved, that turned into riots, and obviously these kind of things tend to continue for a few days. They don't just go away.
Yeah.
So in response, the Indonesian government blocked internet access and telephone data. So internet access basically means a connection to allow you to use the internet to either make phone calls, do other things, access websites, access apps, use all those kind of things. You need access to the internet in order to do all of that. Basically, that's your connection.
Yeah.
So if you block internet access, you can't connect to the internet, and therefore you can't go on websites, you can't go online, you can't use a bunch of these apps and so on. And they block telephone data as well, so people will look at their phones and they'll read, okay, no service, no Wi-Fi, nothing like that.
Yeah, so I guess that would probably mean they can't call each other as well.
Exactly. They can't call, they can't message, they can't kind of spread things up. As we see, protesters couldn't see or spread information online. Now, I'm thinking back to the Arab Spring movement, which is again sort of 6-7 years ago, maybe a bit
not
more.
even that long, maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, so a lot of that was organized by people using apps, Facebook and Twitter and other things like that to kind of organize in Arab countries. So I think maybe once governments realized people could do that, that's when they realized that, okay, shutting down and blocking internet access is our way to combat that. So they kind of know this has been used, apps and so on have been used to organize crowds for a long time now.
True.
It used to be people would just go and, they'd tell each other, like, let's get together, let's form a crowd, let's do something.
I mean, people have always found ways to rise up. I don't think that the internet is, an absolute, it's not like you can't do it without it.
Yeah,
but
it just makes it
efficient,
easy way to organize people and get on. So, as we know, a lot of protest groups all around the world have been using apps to organize, which means that internet shutdowns like this have been on the rise.
Yeah, exactly. So on the rise, it's, when something rises, it goes up. So when something is on the rise, it means it's increasing. It's becoming a more and more frequent thing that people do, more and more popular.
And so because of this, governments around the world have been using them, shutdowns, as a tool, not only to prevent large crowds from forming, but also to stem the spread of information they see as a threat to their authority.
Ah, there's that other stem.
Yeah, in this case, stem means to stop or restrict something. So as you can see, there's a big difference between stem from, which is to kind of grow or start, and stem something means to cut it right back, to prevent it.
Yeah.
So we also use the grammar structure not only but also here to show that there's more than one thing going on. It's not just for this. It's also for this. We've kind of talked about how it prevents large crowds from forming by blocking the apps and communication. But the second part of this is even more important, I think, because it stems the spread of information they see as a threat, stops people from posting about it online, from contacting other groups around the world, that sort of thing. And the government see this information as a threat to their authority.
Yeah, exactly. So a threat is something that puts you in danger. And also the verb would be threaten, but threat here is a noun. So when when a protest is a threat, I guess that means that, the information they put out to the world could put the authority or the power of these governments in danger.
Yeah, could be from outside powers who might intervene with economic sanctions or something else.
Yep.
Or that knowledge being spread more might mean if they are a democratic government, they could lose power the next time there's an election. Or in some cases, the army, if they learn about all this stuff, may decide to act. There have been, coups, we call them, C-O-U-P, where the army has decided that's it, like Zimbabwe. As happened a few years ago, I think, where the army decided, no, that's it, we're taking power because the government is just too useless.
Yeah, I think there was an attempted coup in somewhere in Southeast Asia recently as well.
Yeah, and there was the one in Turkey where it kind of got a bit nasty between the government and some parts of the army as well.
And there was an attempted one in Colombia.
Yep, it's not uncommon.
They don't always succeed. Sometimes they do, but usually the government finds a way to hold on to its power at whatever cost.
Yeah, we see in the article that limiting the internet also allows governments to control stories about abuses of power and human rights violations. And of course, that doesn't just happen during times of protest. I mean, you think of China and North Korea basically just like, no, you don't get the whole internet or any internet. You only get our own.
You only get the internet that we want you to have.
Yeah, or the internet that only is in Korea.
Yeah.
And so therefore North Korea. And then people can't talk about any problems that are going on. They can't say people are being abused, people are being taken away. That's what we mean by abuses of power and human rights violations. An abuse of power is the government basically using their power to do bad things, to do things that they shouldn't be allowed to do.
Yeah.
Whether it's arresting people without any kind of rules about it, whether it's just giving companies the power to do whatever they want, whether it's saying, no, we're going to be government for another 5 years without an election.
Yeah, or
anything
saying,
like that.
Like, if you criticize the president, you're going to be put in prison.
Yes, that
sort
of
thing.
stuff. And a human rights violation is when people's human rights, to whether it's to work, to vote, for free speech, to be arrested with a trial. People normally need to have a reason to be arrested, that they've evidence of a law being broken. But if you just arrest them and throw them in jail without a trial or without anything, that's a human rights violation.
Yeah. There's all sorts of ways that people can violate human rights.
Yes. Go on the internet and you'll find lists and lists and lists.
Oh, yes. And lots of people speaking out about it because it's always something that's happening in all sorts of places around the world.
Like even kind of countries with fair democracies, it happens.
Like the US.
Oh, yeah, and the UK. So that is what a shutdown is. We'll talk about what a shutdown can mean for a government and the people in the second part of our article, but right now we'll take a short break. Welcome back, everyone. So we've talked about shutdowns, and now we see what they can mean. We see shutdowns come with enormous consequences.
Of course they do.
Yeah, a consequence is a result. It's something that happens as a result of something else. So the consequences are for the people who want to be using the internet, but not just for them, as we see.
Yeah, so I think a consequence, is not just a neutral result, but usually it's kind of a bad result, like a punishment.
I don't know. I would say that a consequence of something could be anything. It does depend on the situation. So
but often I hear it as, if you
break this, there'll be serious consequences.
There will be consequences. You'll suffer the consequences. You'll face the consequences.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
I think of it as neutral, but it's often used in that serious. I always think of serious consequences.
Yeah, very serious. So it's a serious sort of word.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Anyhow, so without internet access, what are the consequences? Well, citizens can't inform the international community of any abuses taking place, like we were just talking about, those abuses of power, human rights violations, if the government can control those stories from getting out by,
blocking the internet.
Yeah, blocking the internet and stopping people from posting about them, then how are they supposed to let the rest of the world know? The only thing they could do is take a plane somewhere and tell somebody. use the internet there.
Yeah, and it also means there's a kind of a lack of proof. If you can't post a video evidence, then, it's just words, so who knows who's writing what. So you need that extra proof.
Unless people have, people have to have the same story going on.
Yes, exactly. And we see it's then difficult for other countries to justify taking action against offending governments. So to justify basically means to say, yes, we've got a reason for doing this, that we will respond and it's the right thing to do against offending governments. Offending in this case means they've done some kind of offense, whether it's abuse of power, human rights violations, general internet blocking. We're talking about governments who break their rules.
Right, exactly. And so it makes it hard for anybody to say, well, we have enough evidence and we definitely have real cause to go in there and do something.
To punish the country with economic means or whatever.
Because it's already very, very hard for countries to do that, even if they know that something is going on.
Yeah, they need a kind of a super good reason and agreement across, the UN and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly, or NATO. Yeah, so shutdowns also make it harder for countries to encourage economic investment. So this means we're talking about money now. So not just human rights violations, not just government reasons, but about money. So economic investment means that when you invest in something, it means you put money into it, expecting that you're going to get a return on it at some point because it's going to grow in value or it's going to, make a lot of money that you'll then get back.
Kind of bring business, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So if a country has a growing economy and other companies like large corporations and things like that want to invest in that country economically, it's really hard to do so if you don't have access to internet.
Exactly. Now, personal investment could be things like, I'm going to put some money in a savings account or I'm going to buy a house and hopefully it'll be worth a lot more later.
Yeah.
But this kind of investment means, massive amounts of money being given for transport projects, for trade companies, for big business.
Yeah.
So we see if potential investors are worried they won't have internet access, they'll go elsewhere. So an investor is someone who makes an investment, a person, a company, something like that. But they'll go, I don't know about starting a business there or putting money in there. If they don't have good internet access, if there are all these kinds of government shutdowns, I may not get my money back. So I will go elsewhere. I'll invest in a country with internet access where things are safer.
Yeah, so it's in the interest of a lot of people, including the government, to have stability of, ease of access to internet. So I think it's actually a pretty bad decision to shut down the internet.
Yes, we see shutdowns can also cause disorder in people's daily lives.
So hospitals, banks, and other important services require internet access to run properly. That's true because, hospitals, a lot of, vital tracking these days. The data that they have on their patients, it's
all online. It's shared, so you might not be able to access proper patient files and things like that.
And so you might not know how to help somebody if they have an emergency.
Exactly, and the banks need, other important services, postal services, maps, stuff like that. Tourism will start to fail, all those kinds of things.
Absolutely. So, there's a lot of things that depend on the internet these days. Everything is online, and so it can't be overstated just how important it is to keep that access up. So what about the protesters? How do they deal with it? Well, we see to get around shutdowns, protesters have turned to Bluetooth apps, which don't require internet access. Right.
To get around something means there's basically a problem, but instead of trying to smash through the problem or kind of solve exactly that problem, you find another way round. You sort of go around the side, you don't exactly solve it, but you find a different solution that allows you to do what you want. Even though it doesn't actually fix the problem.
Right.
So they're not fixing a shutdown. They're not turning the internet back on. They're just finding another way. So that's what we mean by get around it. And so they use Bluetooth apps. I use Bluetooth headphones, a Bluetooth mouse at home. So, they don't need internet. They're just kind of connections between computers.
Yeah,
they're
it's basically like a shortwave radio.
Yeah, it's like you pair two devices and then you can play music on one and hear it on the speaker speakers in another room or something like that.
And so you can pair a phone to another phone as well.
Yes.
So you could
use somebody else's internet or just send them messages through different services.
Exactly. So these mesh networks let people spread information to those in their surrounding areas. Think of it as, one person has information about something. They connect the Bluetooth to another person's phone. That person connects to another person, so on and so on. So gradually things spread from person to person. It's much slower, but I guess it still has an effect. It still has the potential to share information.
Yeah, a mesh is like a kind of a structure with like lots of threads or wires connecting and crossing one another. Think of like the fabric in clothes is kind of like a mesh, or it's kind of like a net with all these different lines and they're all kind of touching each other in lots of places. And in this case, it's like information. So it's information networks where people sort of pass it this way, and as Kat said, it all kind of spreads through all these different short connections rather than like one long connection to the internet.
Yeah. One connection that can reach a bunch of people at the same time. It would have to be one person to one person.
Yeah, and it usually pretty short range. So you can Bluetooth stuff that's within kind of your
10
same...
meters?
Yeah, pretty
3
much
meters,
like within
like
your house or something like that. And so you do it to the guy outside, who does it to the guy across the road, who does it to the guy in the next street, and so on.
Yep. So
yeah,
there is a
perfect.
problem, though.
Yeah, however, so these Bluetooth apps, they are also less secure than encrypted online apps, potentially putting movement participants in danger. If something is encrypted, the information is turned into a code, and so you can only access it if you have like the key to that code, or if you have, some kind of other password or authorization.
Yeah.
So if it's encrypted, you basically, it's a lot safer. So stuff like Facebook and all of that, that's encrypted data.
Yeah, and line messages are usually encrypted
Exactly.
as well.
So they're a lot harder to spy on. But Bluetooth apps are often not encrypted. So in this case, people can just sort of find them if they've got the right technology.
Uh-oh.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
So it puts participants in danger. So, their ID, their personal details, their location could all be accessed by the government's, forces, the police or whatever.
Yeah.
And so they could easily be found and arrested.
Yeah.
Or worse. So, yes, they're in danger.
Yeah. Nonetheless, means, regardless of whatever happens, with few other choices, people are turning to them, because this is not their first solution, but it's the one they've got to use. They're turning to them as they organize.
Yes, it kind of beats sending pigeons or smoke signals or anything like that.
Or Pony Express.
Exactly, that's a shutdown. So despite their negative impacts, so despite the problems of shutdowns and what they cause, it's unlikely that shutdowns will disappear anytime soon. Governments just find them an immediate way of like, bam, we do it and we cut down on a lot of the problems straight away.
Yeah, exactly. However, people everywhere are learning from their fellow citizens and will continue to find ways to challenge their governments.
Yes, they're not letting the lack of internet stop them.
Of course not, because if you have a good cause, you will fight for it in whatever way you know how.
Exactly. That's all the time we have for today. Big issue, a lot to think about, a lot to read about, a lot of extra stuff you can go out online to check out about this subject. Please do so. But that's all the time we've got. So for English Digest, I'm Pat.
And I'm Kat.
Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.